Good evening, everyone. Those here and those joining us remotely. Welcome to this meeting of the Value for Money Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Joan Hegan and I'm Vice Chairman of this committee, and I'm chairing the meeting this evening. I'm supported by a number of the officers: Robin Taylor, Head of Policy and Governance, Annie Wrighton, Strategic Director, Peter Vickers, Head of Finance and Property, David Allen, Head of Business Transformation, Louise Norrie, Corporate Policy Manager, Nora Coppin, Policy and Performance Officer, Mark Mills, our Scrutiny Officer, Kimberly Sohn, our Democratic Services Officer, who's in charge of the technology for this meeting, and Georgina Hall, also Democratic Services Officer, who is clerking the meeting. The first item on our agenda are the minutes of the meeting on the 29th of June and 12th of July, which have been published on the website. Can members please indicate if they're in agreement to those minutes? I've got 2 agreements, 3 agreements, 4 agreements, 5, 6. Good, we have an agreement. Have we? Apologies for absence. I know we have apologies from Councillor Peter Martin, who's been substituted by Councillor John Gray. Welcome. And also apologies from Councillor Stephen Mulliner. Are there any others? No, we're all present. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest?
No, Chair.
Any questions from members of the public?
None received.
Any questions from members?
None received.
So the first substantive item is our committee work programme, which Mark Mills will lead us through.
Thank you, Chair. It's basically as is written at the moment, but with 2 changes. We were hoping to have emergency planning and the business transformation items come to this meeting. Unfortunately, that hasn't been possible, and I need to take responsibility for the second of those. But they will be coming to the November meeting, hopefully, and the relevant heads of service assure me that neither of them is urgent and it should be possible to take them in November. The only other thing I'd emphasise is that, notwithstanding those two slippages, the work programme post this meeting is looking relatively thin. The items that are there are quite substantive, but if you have any ideas for things we might want to add to the work programme and look at in future, I think that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mark. Did anyone have any observations for the future programme? I did have one when I was reading through the papers and thinking about the item on our agenda this evening to do with SIL money. I felt that it perhaps would be useful at some point if we had a look at how Section 106 money is being rolled forward and used and monitored. Because I looked on the website and there appears to be about £14.5 million of Section 106 money that is available. Some of it I know is for projects that have been finished, and I feel a need to understand more about that money, where it's come from, where it's destined to go. I know each project is ring-fenced, but I feel that as a committee, it's possibly within our remit to understand more about that money. I don't know if anyone has any views. Councillor Adams.
Of course, a lot of the 106 money is allocated to the IDP, which is all part of the local plan. I think what would be very useful is to have a document published regularly for this report, which actually said, this is what is in the IDP, and this is what is allocated to each of these items, and these are the shortfalls. And that would then put it all in quite clear description for everybody to understand where we stand and what we need the money for, and what extra we can reasonably ask for from developers as we're going forward.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you. I'm sure that IDP would be useful, but the section 106 does need keeping an eye on. There's quite a few areas, whereas if we don't spend and commit the money within certain dates, the money can actually go back. So I think it would be very worthwhile actually from time to time looking at the section 106 that, as you suggested, Chairman.
Councillor Hyman.
Thanks. Yes, I mean that would be a good idea, but there's an argument that a planning committee should be doing that. The section, if it's a planning committee who are planning committees are putting the section 106 agreements, or have in the past put those in place, and know what it was meant for. I don't know to what extent we should be there's a crossover there, but I do know that some of our new Farnham residents members a couple of years ago, when they came in, were very keen to get looking at section 106 monies that were available, particularly in view of the Farnham infrastructure project sort of thing. So I will ask George Hess and one or two others where they've got to, because obviously if they've already done some work on it, chasing it up, I know that there are spreadsheets available to us to keep track of. I'll ask them whether there's something they can help us with on that, if they've been through it themselves. But I would agree with Councillor Adams that a report would be good, but is it going to get complicated? Because I think the items on the IDP were there in February 2018 and sort of, you know,
I mean,
ephemeral
I think,
or something might be the word. I don't know.
I
So how
think
do you track that?
that's the reason why it'd be good to pull it out and dust it off, because as Councillor Gray says, some money can just leach away through inactivity, and I think it would be a useful exercise to overview it. If we can maybe.
Councillor Gray certainly right in that respect. Yes, it would be good.
Does anyone have any other thoughts on items that should be on our forward work programme? Councillor Hyman.
Only because of the way forward that we're going in respect of home working and that sort of thing, and you know the problems that could come from it, the reasons why people have gone to work in the past. I just wondered to what extent is value for money or individual councillors even able to scrutinise the you know the sort of contracts that we're putting in place, and you know, if we're taking on staff in future and we're asking them to come into work, they might want paying 20% extra than people who don't have to come into work, and we could end up with a general 20% increase in our salary bill over the years if things don't work out as some people hope they will. And obviously we don't want to be taking risks like that. I just wonder to what extent are we at value for money able to scrutinise our HR arrangements, because I know whenever I've mentioned it in the past, it's been, you know, you're not allowed to talk about that. Well, I do think that value for money, when the biggest bill we've got is 17 million or whatever that we're spending a year, I mean, it's a massive amount of money. And if we're not allowed to talk about it, what can we talk about?
Robin, would you like to make a comment on that?
Well, Chairman, only to say that it's not the case that we're not allowed to talk about it. And obviously this committee has received a number of HR reports over time and will continue to do so. And if there's a specific report that you want to receive, then please ask for it. And obviously officers will make arrangements for that to be brought. But you would need to be clear as a committee, obviously, exactly what it is that you were seeking to scrutinise and explore.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hyman, if you could drop an email so that Peter Martin and I can...
But specifically productivity and efficiency, because that's what the public, you know, our residents that we serve are going to be looking at, I think, you know, in future years. So if there's never ever going to be a way of measuring it or us scrutinising it in any way, that would be a bit of a poor show. We do need to have some baseline figures, somewhere we're working from. I don't know what data is available at the moment, but it is a matter that I've raised on occasion. And I do think it's something that we very much need to keep on top of, particularly if we're in arrangements with another council and collaborating. We would expect them to be doing the same. I think I would expect it to be part of arrangements that we do monitor our, you know, our productivity, because you can't have one council, you know, to tow the other along.
we'll put that into the programme. Thank you. Any other suggestions?
Yes, I mean, I agree with Councillor Hyman in that. I think also as part of that, we should also see what work is being allocated to which area of which council.
I think that falls more into the collaboration where we're not, whereas I think Councillor Hyman's talking about our current profile of employees, which I think we can scrutinise. But it's a good point for the future of the collaboration discussions.
That does highlight that maybe it would be worth having a standing item on the Guildford collaboration, because it is likely to presumably come up on a pretty regular basis.
Chairman, are we talking about that later? Have we got a verbal update on that later that we can take that further? Thanks.
Okay, back to our own work programme. Okay, we'll move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the corporate performance report. Nora, if you could lead us off on that, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good evening, members. So the report that is in front of you this evening covers the first quarter, which is April, May, and June 2021. I will allow each of the heads of service to delve into the details of what was exactly happening in their specific service areas. I just wanted to remind the members that although we have the full report covering all the services throughout the council, this committee specifically is asked to look at business transformation, finance and property, and policy and governance. And we'll start the review of the report on the page 31 of your papers, agenda papers. I also wanted to mention something that might be of interest to the committee, which is that we are starting our annual service plans and budgetary preparation exercise, and the proposals of the service plans and the budgets will be coming to the O&S committees at the January cycle. So without further ado, I will pass on to David Allen, who will be offering a little bit more details on business transformation performance in the first quarter. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nora. Yeah, if I could just draw the committee's attention to 4 or 5 points and then open up to any questions. It seems an awful long time ago, April, actually. So the world seems to have moved on quite a lot as we kind of come to the end of quarter 2. But in quarter 1, business transformation wise, we were coming to the conclusion of the staff travel project, which was quite a tough road to go down, but ultimately we've delivered just over £200,000 worth of savings, so overachieved our kind of target figure on that. So very good effort by the team that were involved in that particular process. And in quarter 1 also, we were starting the planning for the Where Work Happens change, and that was very much has taken place in this most recent quarter, and anybody who's been into the very recent days will have seen the very significant changes that are arising as a result of that, with the second floor now completely vacated, and we'll be looking for alternative uses for that. In the IT world, something that doesn't massively affect members but is very significant to the rest of the organisation was the move to Office 365 and the move of the Citrix environment, which I know not that many members have, but that was a kind of really big deal for the IT team. And the other thing which members will have much more direct experience of is the kind of impact that continual cyber attacks has on us, and all the kind of work we have to do and the investment we have to make to kind of offset that. And you'll see from my kind of report that that's been recognised nationally by some of the kind of trade bodies for the work that the team have been doing. One particular initiative we're just introducing actually affects the kind of planning web portal, which I know a lot of members access, especially if you're on one of the planning committees, because we're just buying some software that's going to, we hope, really kind of improve things on that. We did a real deep analysis of the traffic that was coming to that particular site, and over 50% of it is what they call aggressive bots, which is kind of unfriendly kind of attacks that we have to fend off. And we're buying some new equipment that makes that process a bit smoother and a bit more efficient. And we're hoping that that will kind of really improve the kind of positive traffic to the site. And my final comment is just on the customer services centre. We're now getting the new reports through from our new system. We can see that in terms of phone calls in particular, there's been no let up during the summer. The team are really kind of stretched, given the input that's coming in. A lot of that, and I don't know whether this kind of reflects what members see in their post bags, but a lot of that is around environmental services issues, particularly on missed bins. Despite the efforts BIFA are making, we're still having significant numbers of bins missed, and that kind of whatever we put on the web and the messages that we give, it's still generating plenty of traffic, and we're having to try and find ways to cope with that. So I think I'll leave it there, Chair, and open it to any questions people might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. Any questions? Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. I read in my paper over the weekend, part of the return to office working has opened up what would appear to be new series of security issues, particularly with those staff who have been bringing their laptops back into work. Would you like to comment on how safe you feel that we are?
Yeah, in terms of IT, people can't access our systems unless we give them permission to. So if staff are using their own laptops, they'll already be the same as they would as if they were at home. They'll be working under the same circumstances. So people work at home on laptops at the moment, but they're fully secure. Our systems can't be corrupted, and they haven't been by anybody using the laptop to date.
Any other questions? Councillor Hyman and then Councillor Adams.
Thanks. Yes, just the matters which David has brought forward here, and we're on page 31. The Where Work Happens project. I mean, I was assured by senior people at the council that we went through all of that at our March meeting, which I'm not entirely sure whether I just fell asleep during that meeting or not, because and there's nothing in the minutes saying that we did. So I'm just wondering whether we are going to be doing any scrutiny ourselves of that, or whether it's considered, because I was certainly given the impression that it was done and dusted, all sorted, and we wouldn't be expecting to see it here, because it was part of the transformation project, which is over or something like that. We certainly haven't. There are a lot of questions that need to be asked, but I know that doesn't necessarily mean that it can come back in front of us. But I'd just like to know whether we are, what stage we're at. David mentioned that there was obviously difficult situation with changing the staff travel arrangements and compensation, and I wondered whether there was anything to do with staff contracts or whatever that is still to be sorted out, that we should be involved in the scrutiny of. Just at the bottom of that page 31, I just wondered what an all-out wet spot was, because I think I've got one, but we don't want to talk about that. But if I could know about that. And over the page, on the top of page 32, we're only noting that there are problems with people trying to abrogate their responsibilities. Actually, it's the wording, I can't be talking about causing flood risk problems. Enforcement, something which in other places we are very keen to get on top of at the council. I think a lot of members are. I just wonder whether officers would be able to give us some idea of, going forwards, how robust do we expect our stance or officers' stance to be in preventing breach of planning regulations that's causing increased flood risk? Because I think we do feel like we need to be assured that our officers will take a robust approach. because it's very important that we don't allow developers to get away with not building to the plans that were consented, or in other ways causing flood risk, increasing flood risk elsewhere, which is the problem. Thanks.
David, just before I ask you to comment on that, I do think I agree with Councillor Hyman. It would be good to have some sort of summary of the conclusions of the Where Work Happens programme, because it does impact on the future for the council in terms of planning where we are, not just in relation to the collaboration item, but in terms of the future of the berries as well, which is referred to in the report. But if you could comment on all of those points, which was where work happens, where our wet spots are, and what we do about people who abrogate their responsibilities and develop inappropriately.
Yes, so on the Where Work Happens project, yeah, that noted what you've said there, Chair, so that's fine. Councillor Harman's point about contracts, etc., that is still a live debate, actually. We've made the physical changes to the building now, but in terms of kind of staff contracts, what that might mean in practice is people are working from home for long periods of time, or on a permanent basis. That's still a live debate that's ongoing at the moment as part of the work stream. So that's kind of work in progress. I'm not sure if wet spots is a proper technical term. That was just my equivalent of turning hot spots into wet spots, given that we were talking about water rather than anything else. So but what it means in practice is that right across the borough, we know where we get flood risk and where we have drainage problems, and we know that when we get high levels of rainfall, the areas that get wet, and we discuss strategies and opportunities for resolving those with our partners, which in the main is Surrey County Council, the Environment Agency, and the Water Authority, which is Thames Water across most of the borough. So we know, for example, that our two most significant wet spots, if you like, are Elstead, where Surrey County Council are carrying out some work at the moment, and the second one is Alfold, where there isn't the drainage capacity infrastructure to when we got really high levels of rainfall. So we know those are our two particular wet spots, and we attend to them. And the enforcement comment is, it's not actually really a question for us, because Surrey are the enforcement authority when it comes to this sort of thing. The problem that we have with riparian owners, and this is particularly the case in Elstead, is that when kind of culverts or drains run through their properties, that they are obliged actually to maintain them. But what some people do is kind of block them off. So their bit of land's okay, but somebody else somewhere along the chain kind of suffers. And in those cases, it's Surrey who are the lead enforcement agency for doing something about that. Thanks.
Councillor Adams.
Yes, that's more general point, really. I found this index at the front was extremely useful and very helpful. But when I came to actually relate what the index at the front was talking about to various parts of the following parts of the document, I found it quite difficult to relate all of those back to the various areas that are itemized as important in our tracker in the front. I was wondering if there could be some kind of indexation along the right-hand side of the scrutiny tracker and others, which identified where these items were actually appearing in the document that we're looking at.
Chair, if I may, that's not a problem at all. It is something we can add in the future. My apologies, that was overlooked, because the links are active and they would work on a soft version of the document. But of course, when the copies are printed out, you actually lose that visibility. So we're going to add page numbers going forward, Councillor Adams, not a problem.
Thank you.
I had a couple of observations on the report, David. The first is, what on earth is a low-code automation solution?
Yeah, so I'm a layman myself, so I'll say this in layman's terms. It's basically some a software that we can write ourselves based on our that links to our environment and the Liberty products that we bought. So effectively, it's us writing a solution ourselves rather than employing somebody else to do it. We've kind of got the basic toolkit, if you like, and then we've skilled up our staff to use it. So rather than get somebody else to do it, we kind of buy the basics and build it. It's a bit like a DIY. It's a bit like IKEA furniture.
Okay.
Instead of getting something fully built, you get the bits and put it together yourself.
I mean, I do have a nervousness about the concept of reducing demand, because these are our residents and they're entitled to ask us questions. So the whole concept of reducing demand as opposed to providing a more efficient service, they might boil down to the same thing, but I think in presentational terms, that's quite an important distinction.
Yes, sorry, Chair, if I can just sort of jump in and clarify that. By reducing demand, we mean reducing phone demand, really, because the demand then comes in via the web, which is obviously, it's cheaper for us to respond to such inquiries, but you still make the inquiry, just use a different channel.
I still have a nervousness about that because of the high proportion of older people who don't exist online. So I hope we are being sympathetic to the needs of people who do feel telephone is the right way to express themselves. I don't know if other members agree with that, but I think we do have to respect that some people will always want to contact us that way.
Yeah, at the moment, we're not removing any channels, we're just adding additional online channels.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Marriott. Sorry, can you switch on?
It's a different subject. It's the horizon planning system that's been rumbling on for many months now. And I noticed the comment in the text here as there were systemic or partly systemic issues. That seems to me they are issues which may have been, perhaps should have been identified in the specification stage. I wonder if we could have a little bit of detail on those.
So yeah, there wasn't a specification in the traditional way for this project, which I kind of inherited this one part way through. But the decision that was made a number of years ago, after a kind of a procurement exercise that we didn't proceed with after the successful bidder failed due diligence, because of the cost of the alternatives. The way we did this system was we built it together with the developer. So it's a system that hasn't cost us anything in terms of capital outlay. We had a project team that worked with the developer and produced this system jointly. So we have worked together hand in hand with the developer over 2 to 3 years. And they have delivered what we have asked them to do in partnership with them during that 2 to 3 year period. I mean, first we did the building control system, which is a little bit further down the line, but delivered on exactly the same basis, and we've gone through exactly the same trajectory of issues, if you like, with that, and are now out over the other side, and we're experiencing the same thing with planning. But a lot of it is based on what we asked them to do, and that sometimes they've delivered it and understood exactly what it is we meant, and sometimes that hasn't quite happened, and those are the things that we're correcting at the moment.
Was that satisfactory, Councillor Marriott?
Well, yeah, thank you. It's I mean, it does lead to the need for properly defined specifications, that these problems shouldn't exist, actually. So,
yeah. Councillor Bisham, and then Councillor Davidson, and then Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chair. Getting back to flooding problems, we also have problems in Farnham, particularly in the Bourne, because of, well, basically infilling overdevelopment, and the infrastructure there can't cope with it. I've got one particularly bad one that I've been working on for a year with Surrey County Council, and we're going round in circles. They claim it's a wet spot, but it's a serious flood. And Waverley Borough Council have been very helpful. They've loaned the lady 200 sandbags, which has solved her problem to some extent, but it's all going next door now, and the drains just can't cope with it. They're not up to the overbuilding that's gone on there. So there are problems in Farnham and probably elsewhere as well. I'm still working on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be interested in the details on that, Councillor Blishan, because we haven't got Farnham as a kind of wet spot area. We do know that there are some individual properties that are prone to flooding, but we haven't got a group of properties where we can come together and put some sort of scheme together to resolve it. So if there are individual problems that aren't being resolved, let me know, and I'll talk to the other authorities about that.
Thank you for that, but this is a very young family with a tiny baby and 2 young children, and they keep getting flooded. And Surrey County Council suggested they divert the flood water around the side of the house. Now, their insurance company has said that will invalidate their insurance policy, and I'm not surprised either. So the house next door is getting it all at the moment, but this has taken a year to get nowhere so far, and I'd like to see some action on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, if you can forward me the details on that one, I'll talk to Surrey about it.
Thank you.
Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow on with what Councillor Marriott raised. What would be very nice would be a commitment for a specific date when the issues associated with the planning website is resolved. It just seems to be a continuing, ongoing poor performance from that particular service, which we offer to our, not only to us councillors, but also to our residents.
Okay, so the planning web is completely outside of the Horizon project. They're two completely different things, and we are looking at the kind of planning web continually. I've made loads of changes actually to gradually improve performance. The next significant step that we're taking is the Radware. We bought a product called Radware, which it's, as I was talking about earlier, over half the traffic to that particular site is aggressive bots, and so the Radware is hopefully going to deal with those aggressive bots and kind of free up resource in the rest of the site to respond quicker, because system speed seems to be the main thing. We've already had to cut off all access to that site from everywhere outside of the UK virtually because of all the kind of attacks that have been made on it. And we've also now got the question of, and this is a kind of live a live question that we're dealing with at the moment, looking at the options we've got on it, because we include a kind of measuring tool as part of our service, looking at the possibility of separating that out, because the measuring tool again contributes to system slowness. So we're trying to gradually identify and eradicate all these causes of system slowness, and the Radware system is our next attempt to do so.
If I may, do we have a date when this will all be completed?
Well, the Radware, we're just buying the products at the moment, so that won't be too long before that comes online. I haven't got an exact date. I'll find that out for you. And then we'll review again and see what sort of impact that has, and what problem that we're left with after we've introduced that.
Can I suggest we maybe put something into our forward work programme for November to have a formal review of views on software efficiency? If members could perhaps feed any specific questions through to Mark, he could perhaps pull together a report for us to consider.
Just thinking, Chairman, in that respect, we value for money, and I think some of the things are almost planning in or go between the two, because I'm pretty sure Environment O&S would also want to have a big pop at the planning application records, you know, that website. But as far as
that's fair comment, yes. Can I just let Mark respond to that first?
Oh, yeah, sure.
It certainly could fall within planning, but this is also value for money in customer service committee, so it probably falls most comfortably within the customer service
I just think
remit,
it's
I would have
wider.
thought.
Thank you. You're absolutely right, Mark. But I think it's a little bit wider, that a wider interest. It's of interest to all councillors right across. And I don't, think if we're only looking at it from the point of view of value for money, which is what we should be doing, really, then we're missing an awful lot of what people are whinging about, or complaining, but not whinging, but complaining quite justifiably.
I think if we switch to the customer service aspect of it, and bearing in mind what's going to happen further down the agenda when we talk about parking, one committee should take the lead on issues, and it's been raised here. David's in charge of that. He reports to this committee. I think we should take the widest possible view from here. Sorry, you did have another point.
As far as the Horizon system is concerned, I got into that quite, or tried to get into the fundamentals of where the problem lay back up when it really blew up, I suppose it was the end of April time, because we'd just switched over to it. It did seem very much, I mean, some members of staff were very, very helpful, but I was also getting sort of like helpful in me putting together a completely contradictory picture of what was going on, because of course there are the usual sort of snagging issues you get with any new software. There was certainly the issue that Councillor Marriott has just mentioned of whether it was designed properly in the first place, or whether we had given the correct instructions to the developer. And there was also very much, I understand, an issue of, well, once it was built, staff realised that actually they needed different functionality to what they'd identified previously, so that falls under the same heading. But there were a lot of other issues with it. I didn't feel satisfied that I really understood what the problem was. I just knew that we'd taken on a very capable new lady who was going to get her head into it. And we got a promise of being done by, I think it was the end of August, not the beginning of August. I think we had a promise that all of the backlog would be removed by the end of August. I just wondered whether we'd managed to meet that. It was what people were told. I have no idea what the situation is now.
Well, I feel it hasn't been resolved, and I do think that's a wider planning service issue, but again, it's customer service. So I don't know what's the best way to deal with this, Mark, but taking Councillor Hyman's point that many councillors are affected, would it be worth sending an email to all councillors to ask of their views on systems inefficiencies that we should perhaps be looking at in the round as a topic for this committee?
Yep, we can certainly appeal to members beyond this committee for their experience and perspectives. And of course, within the chair's discretion, councillors who don't sit on this committee can register to speak and attend these meetings if they wish.
I think my view is that if we're going to call for a report in the round on systems efficiencies, issues and things that we should be having a clear timetable on getting a resolution on, we should canvass at the scoping stage ideas from others, and then we'll take it forward as a committee, would be my vision. Is that okay with everyone? Councillor Adams.
Listening to what everybody's been saying, there's obviously new methods of development that have been going on here. There's a situation where we're just really changing existing system into a new system. There's a situation where that's then leading to scope changes, additional scope changes. And there's also issues, obviously, that have turned up which relate to volumes, some volumes which we've not encountered before, and some volumes which we don't want on our system anyway. Are all of these issues collected now? Has the department actually got a view of all of these issues, and can they categorize them into the different areas so that we know whether, in fact, what they're telling us is fully understood and therefore actually predictable, and areas where things are not understood, which then become unpredictable. And I think those two should be separated.
Sorry, we'll try and pull all of those strands together into scoping. Thank you. I think we've done the business transformation part of the agenda to death, and so I shall move quickly on, if I may, to finance and property investment. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just walk you through the key points, really. So just in the service summary, I've spelt out there where we've been at for the last few months. Post-pandemic, all the services under me are actually really busy, and it's a credit to them that they are holding up really well, and they're achieving the results that has been asked of them. In terms of performance indicators, the only one that's really posing a challenge to us are the business rates. The reason for that is that the government changed or brought quite a few businesses back into rating partway through the year. So there's been quite a lot of logistics setting all that up, because there's been a big tranche of our local businesses that haven't paid business rates for over a year, well over a year through the pandemic, which meant that there's quite a lot of logistics around the bank permissions that need to be put in place again. So that's had a knock-on effect, but the team are well on top of that, and I'm expecting them to pull that around. So we should see the money coming in, reprofiled over the remainder of the year. Internal audit, there aren't actually anything outstanding at the moment. There was a recording delay on the actions, hence why that one remained on there. I'll show you that it's cleared. Complaints level ones, there were 2 out of 3 that took some time to resolve, and both of them were particularly complex. One was borderline vexatious. We tend to get these things that we have to deal with around housing benefits and our revenues team. It's people's expectations versus what the council can deliver under statute. But credit to the team that put a lot of effort into dealing with this particular area, and trying to ensure that complaints never get to a point of being a complaint. But we try to work with people to resolve any issues they have, and also to provide service. Unfortunately, there are instances where these things arise, and it gets beyond our own means to deal with it. Financial section shows that there's a 28k adverse position that's been resolved. It was partly to do with we had less government grant coming in for our administrative costs than what we were expecting, and there was a little bit of cost pressure coming through on our agency, but both of those have been resolved going forward in rejigging our budgets so that we can work within what we've got. So that's a quick canter through, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Does anyone have any questions for Peter Vickers? You're being let off lightly.
Thank you.
And so if we could move on to policy and governance, please, Robin.
Thank you, Chair. The Q1 report for this service on pages 38 to 41. There are some indicators in the report of some strain being evident in the service, largely due to high demand across a number of functions within the service. It's something I'm monitoring very carefully and will take into account when I'm drafting my service plan and budget proposals over the next few weeks. In addition to business as usual, there are a number of additional projects that the service had to grapple with during the quarter. In particular, I've noted the elections in May, which for any of you who were involved in it in some way, which I think is probably everyone in this room, you know, it was not a normal set of elections being done within the time of COVID, and very grateful to the team for all their hard work in making it work, as well as a number of other stakeholders and councillors. We also responded to the size submission stage of the Boundary Commission's review of Waverley. So although we are only a consultee, we're clearly a very important consultee, it was important that we engaged with that project, which did present us some challenging timelines, and that's exactly what we did. So grateful to colleagues on that one. Another challenge within the quarter was supporting a wide range of change and transformation projects. And David's already mentioned some of these. Successful business transformation change does rely heavily on input from human resources, comms, legal, corporate policy, democratic functions. All of those sit within my service and all of them are impacted by it. So it's really important that I continue to monitor to make sure that we can actually support those big pieces of work. There are some good points within the key performance indicators, but there's also some ambers and some reds that I'm watching carefully. I'm sure you'll have noticed in particular, the final row within the table, the 0% performance against PG5B, which relates to the turnaround times for land charges inquiries. Now, we've been monitoring within the service turnaround times against land charges inquiries for many a year. It's just part of what the team does. This is the first time you've seen it within this report. Clearly, it's a 0% against target, which is very poor. The detailed commentary around why that is the case, or why that was the case, is set out within paragraph 6.2.2, which I won't reiterate here, but happy to answer any questions on. Hopefully that commentary gives you reassurance that that performance issue was very much on my radar and the team's radar and others during the quarter, and that we took targeted action to tackle it. Turnaround times of 50 days, which it was at its worst, certainly is exceptional, particularly for Waverley, who has tended to perform well compared to other borough councils against this KPI. The report refers that we have reduced it to 22 days. Actually, it's now more like 13 days. So I'm satisfied that we are getting back on track and that we still intend to reach that target within September. Not all of that will show up in the next quarterly report because obviously it's an average indicator. So the extent to which we're currently not meeting that target will show up in the next quarter, but it will certainly show up a much better performance, I hope, than we've seen in this one. On a happier note, the final para relates to or refers to the impact on my budget of having to rely for so long on agency staff in terms of electoral services management. So we've been out to advert a number of times for an electoral services manager, which is obviously a key manager within the team and not the sort of post that you can do without. Elections have to be delivered. It's a requirement that we do so. So we have been relying on a very good, need to be clear, very good electoral services manager, but she is with us on an agency basis, and that there is a financial impact of that. Good news is that the recent interviews that I refer to in the report do appear to have yielded a very good candidate, and I hope in future reports, obviously that's a fairly recent development, I hope in future reports to be able to update you on the good work that I'm sure they will be doing when they come into post. And I will be working with the team, with the returning officer, and with the current agency manager, Louise Stamp, who's been excellent to support our new starter to develop into that role. So thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Robin? Councillor Hyman, then Councillor Gray.
Thanks. Yes, I mean, I thank Robin for being candid and bringing this to us, because what we read at 6.2.2 isn't particularly impressive. Residents, if they're waiting over 50 working days for the local land charge search, could have steam coming out their ears. And but it's very pleasing that if it's down to 13 days now, that's a lot more reasonable. Obviously, some work's been done to sort it out, recognise the problem and got it sorted in the end. But we don't really know how long people were suffering that for, so I don't want to be over enthusiastic, because if they've suffered it for 18 months and we've suddenly got it right at last as we come out of lockdown, that's you know, not quite as good as if we noticed it when, you know, as soon as it got to it got out of hand. I've never liked to read that sort of thing about our council, but it's obviously we can't change history, and we and the fact that it's now been sorted is good. And I'm worried, but page 38 of the in the key performance indicator status box at 6.2, 6.21. I'd just love to understand why we've got this sickness absence when everybody's working at home. I can't relate to a sickness absence when everybody's working from home. I mean, obviously there are, if people got serious illnesses are in hospital and that sort of thing, but I don't think that that's, you know, going to impinge upon our figures too much. I just find that difficult as to why have I want to know why our figures haven't zoomed down through the floor, because everybody's able to work from home and they're not having to go in, so they can carry on through, you know, what they normally would have had to stay at home for, because of course they wouldn't want to spread diseases in the past. Now,
can I interject a comment there, because I think that it is very important that our staff have the ability to recognise when they need to not work because they're unwell, and that they should be actively encouraged to make that distinction, because one of the worst things of working from home is that you try to struggle on when actually you'll get better quicker if you just stop. And I think that should be part of our ethos.
Chairman, if I may, thank you for that. If I may add to that, in terms of Councillor Hyman's question as to why the stats haven't zoomed down, I think they have zoomed down. And one of the reasons for that is that, perhaps as you're suggesting, Councillor Hyman, there is, you know, and as the commentary here refers, the greater flexibility that's offered by working from home does allow some improvement in the sickness statistics. But Councillor Hegan's entirely right. We would not want to see sickness disappear from our stats or go down hugely lower, because I have to say, I think probably all of us would be worried by that stat were we to see it. So the commitment from me, Chair, is that we will continue to monitor that and try and dig into that detail.
Councillor Gray, and then Councillor Adams.
Thank you. I really wanted to comment on the question of land charges on page 39. In the report, it says that turnaround times were above 50 working days. In all the time I've been with this council, this was the first year I got a post bag complaining about land charge turnarounds. And this was earlier in the year. And it wasn't just one single complaint, it was 2 or 3. And what they were complaining about was the fact they were told that they would be waiting at least 2 months, and there was nothing they could do about that. There was no system for priority. And this was affecting sales. This was affecting their ability to complete. It was quite an aggressive stance that was fed back. I did get involved with a couple, and we did manage to resolve them. But the situation was very serious. We're talking well over 60 days in terms of the delay that was expected. And I hope that we're going to learn from that, because if we do get ourselves in a backlog with this, we do need to have an exception process and some way of managing it other than pushing it in and saying, I'm sorry, you're number 32, and that on my present estimate will take you 6 weeks and 42 hours before you get a response. And that was all they could get. I don't want to be unfair to the department, but I think the communication, right, that went during that period was also pretty difficult for solicitors and other people who were making inquiries. Thank you, Chairman, for letting me make that point.
May I respond to that, Chair? I mean, largely just note those comments, Councillor Gray, and appreciate them. And where we had complaints, either from customers or from councillors, then yes, we did. One part of the targeted approach that we took was to try and prioritise those who, in particular, were looking to complete sales in time before the stamp duty holiday expired. So that may well have been the case at the start, that what you're referring to there, but it certainly wasn't the case by the end. But I note those comments, and it was something that was taken very seriously, and that's exactly why we had to put extra staff and targeted action in place. And I appreciate the comments from Councillor Gray that this was, I think you're absolutely right. It doesn't surprise me at all when you say that your post bag suddenly was full of this and it never has been before. And this is what I'm saying. We have not traditionally had issues with our turnaround times at Waverley. So it's disappointment to me, because it's something we've been proud of in the past. As I say, the confluence of staffing issues, some other issues, and the national stamp duty cliff edge thresholds for reduced or no stamp duty, I'm afraid created a very difficult situation. And I don't shy away from that, but it was something that we were able to tackle. But yes, absolutely, we should learn from that. And that's something that we're doing, Councillor Gray, at the moment in terms of reviewing how we move forward as a team.
Thank you. Any other questions for Robin, or should we move on? Councillor Adams. Can you switch on your microphone, please?
Are you fully staffed now?
Yes, but as you know, when new staff, so there's two caveats to that. One is that when new staff come in, it takes time for them to bed in. And the other is that partly our staffing is still reliant on the moment due to some agency staff, which will be costing money. But this isn't a service that produces a profit. So it's only cost that we need to incur in order to deliver a better service. So we're not, we are not fully there yet with the staff team to the extent to which we are still being supported by agency staff, but that was the right thing to do at the time. And I hope that as the year progresses, we'll be able to move on from that position, but it's not something we'll do, in a hurry, because we need to make sure we only do that once we're actually ready to move to the, the longer term approach.
Thank you. Councillor Adams, sorry.
Of course, the same situation is arising now in planning, in that all of the pre-apps are being discouraged from being asked for. And so that's income to planning, which is being lost. And I don't know where they've got to as far as their staffing is concerned, or why there's such long delays now in dealing with pre-apps.
I think that's a very good point. I think we should ask, it's a pity Zach's not on the meeting, but I think we should have a timeline on when we're going to resume the pre-app service. Councillor Gray.
Sorry, just responding to Councillor Adams. We've stopped pre-apps. It's not a question of taking line with a formal notice was put out to saying we were accepting no more pre-apps. And as far as I'm aware, that still applies as of today. I think it's a good question of how long further it's going,
Yeah,
but it isn't a question of prioritizing or taking less. We actually put notice out to stop it. Not alone. I understand that Guildford was in a similar position to that and may still be in a similar position.
No, but I think it's one that we should be keeping an eye on because it is an important source of income. And I think we should just ask for an update at our next meeting. If it's not already been resumed, we should have that firmly in our sights. Okay, if there's no other questions for Robin, can we move on to the Community Infrastructure Levy report? This is a report that is very close to, sorry, Councillor Hyman, I missed you there.
So I do apologise, Chairman. I was hoping that just to be able to point out to members before we left, you're moving on to the next item, aren't you?
Yes, but I'll step backwards.
If we can just go to, if I can just refer members to page 42 and 43 very briefly, they can read it at home. They don't need to, we don't need to discuss it here. The bottom paragraph on page 42, you'll see is some text there about the New Horizon system. It's commercial services, so it's half hours, and but mainly I think planning, I suppose, for building control on their remit. I don't know, but we haven't looked at it. There's some interesting bit about Frensham at the top of the next page, but the bit I really wanted to speak about, I think, residents.
Sorry, Councillor Hyman, can I stop you there because this isn't part of our remit.
It's value for money, and no, it's not in ours. It just mentions, and I'll do, if you don't mind, if I can mention, because in the middle of page 43, it talks about the No Mow May and Let It Bloom June initiatives, and my residents are up in arms about it.
Sorry,
and I do have to
mention. I'm
mention
sorry, but we're
the issue
running,
of value for money here. You know, we're paying people for doing, for
not
not
on our
working.
agenda, and there is an opportunity to put a question to the relevant committee, and I really think we have to move on and stick to our agenda.
Thank you, Chairman.
Can we move on then to Community Infrastructure Levy report? This is an item that the chairman has been pushing to find the right time to investigate in. I don't know if he gave you any notes, Councillor Gray, on his first thoughts as to what this report might contain. If not, then I know that based on his comments in my hearing, he is interested in understanding the process, not second guessing individual infrastructure SIL decisions that have been made, but to really review what's a new process involving some significant sums of money, so that my starters for 10 on what a report might contain would be, can we have the numbers and can we understand the criteria? Can we see the applications that have been made and the decisions that have been made, so we can see the types of work that has been supported, the types of work that hasn't been supported, and see if we agree that the balance is appropriate. I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts on what should be in there. Councillor Gray.
Just generally on that subject, with my knowledge of talking to Councillor Martin, there were some concerns raised about potentially the quality of items being submitted right into it, and I wanted to understand why apparently some issues are not coming forward or couldn't be made to meet the criteria, and other items were. And I think there was a general concern about how the system was working. And therefore, I think that's quite a broad remit, quite difficult to hand on to a scrutiny officer. Effectively, I think the first thing you've got to do with that is to actually analyse what's happened at that first exercise. And from that analysis, then there may be some issues come out which you can then convert into concerns. But I do think it's analysis first and then the concerns. I think there's some speculation about what might have happened, but I don't think that Councillor Martin's got the facts. Thank you for letting me put that in.
No, I'd agree with that 100%, because, you know, we do want everyone in the borough to feel they have a fair opportunity to make bids, and if there is a fee paying opportunity to feedback what constitutes a good and successful bid, that would be equivalent to pre-apps in the planning system. But I think there should be ways for us to help our residents make the most of the process and be sure that we're content that we're getting a fair representation of interests for this money. Any other observations on that? Councillor Adams.
Well, my understanding of how it was working, it might be out of date now, but certainly when it was first set up, a significant proportion of the SIL was allocated for Waverley to allocate on Waverley major developments, facilities. And then under that was the area. So the area where the SIL came from, there was a percentage that went to that. And then there was a small percentage at the end, about 20% or 15%, I think, which was allocatable to smaller areas, which didn't actually qualify so much for SIL because they were in the AONB, or there's other reasons why they couldn't do development. So it was split into 3 groups of allocation. And I think the main one that's appeared and which everybody's talking about is the middle group. Whether that's still how it's structured, I don't know, but that's certainly how it was set up originally.
Yes, certainly there is actually a very interesting report I found on the website called the Annual Infrastructure Funding Statement. The one that's on the website currently is covering the 2019 to 2020 year, but the 2020 to 21 year should be somewhere in course of preparation, as it's mandatory that it's published before the end of the year. That does give some insight into that, and it would be good if the next version of this report was available alongside the more bespoke report that we're commissioning, because I think it does together give more of an insight into where the SIL money is going, and also how we're engaging with Surrey for them to spend their money in our area. So I think there is a lot of information that can usefully be pulled together on that. Sorry, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I think just taking comments that Councillor Adams made there, what would interest me is the Waverley allocated money. And I've not, I think I've seen the report you're referring to. I've not seen any of the report that covers what Waverley's been doing with its money. If it's in there, then you could let me know and I'll find it and do it. But I think what I wanted to see was the total, which was because it's very important to the infrastructure development part of the local plan. There was a sum of money, and it's partly how we justified SIL that we were putting in, and then there was an element that was going down to local, depending on whether you had a neighbourhood plan or not. And then at the bottom tier, there was a small amount of discretionary. The only thing I've seen on certain figures have been around the discretionary stroke local allocation. I would like the confidence that Waverley is spending its money and what it's spending on, that it's doing it against the infrastructure plan. So not just an element of that, still the whole bit. And let's have a look at that.
I agree with you there. There are lists in this report to do with allocation of money, where the allocation was made within the year. And at the end of March 2020, there was almost £2 million unspent of Waverley money. And what I don't know is whether the next iteration of this report will have a section that picks up how previous years' allocations have been spent, as opposed to just doing what the legislation requires, which is to tell us about the allocations that have been made in the year that's being reported on, because that's the issue with statutory reports, is they don't always carry the thing forward. So I think to pull the two together and make sure that our commentary report picks up on what I think are sensible thoughts like that, even if they're not part of the statutory report, would be useful. Councillor Bisham, because you've already had a go, Councillor Adams.
SIL, already in my own ward, there are some real experts in dodging paying SIL. Some are developers, one or two are private people. But for instance, I've got I won't identify where it is. I've got a relatively small bungalow, and they wanted to enlarge it, and they put 3 extensions on, all just under the SIL level. So they haven't had to pay any SIL at all. So I inquired if this was legal and there was any way around it, but I understand there isn't. And this is becoming more commonplace, I'm afraid. So it's something we seriously need to look at. Thank you.
Unfortunately, if the legislation drafters didn't spot that potential wheeze, there's very little we can do about it. Councillor Adams.
Yes, I mean, it's because we had such a large infrastructure requirement when the local plan was produced. That's how we justified having the second highest SIL in the country, which still applies at the moment. The allocation of that, of course, has been made to some projects which were all delayed due to COVID. So that money is still there, and it's allocated to those projects. But it's quite right. There's absolutely no reason why Councillor Gray shouldn't see exactly how it's all been allocated. I think Councillor Martin will have all that information anyway, to be honest, because he was very involved in setting it all up.
Okay, any other observations on SIL before we move on? Yes, Mark.
Sorry, Chair, may I just summarise what I think's been asked for so we can sort of formally request that? So basically asking for the 2 reports that would normally go to the executive, one setting out what has been spent, the other giving any recommendations the SIL Advisory Board has on governance arrangements. There seemed to be a concern essentially about the beginning of the process, how we as a council support and encourage applications, and then also a question about looking back and reviewing at the end of the process how sort of the different funds have made a few years down the road. This issue around the sort of balance of funds between, I believe they're referred to as strategic SIL and neighbourhood SIL, and maybe some of the interaction between those funds, and finally looking at the unspent sections of SIL. Would that capture what people were looking for?
I mean, in the spreadsheet that's on the website, the reporting categories are the potential, which is captured at the date permission is granted, the due, which is invoiced as the development starts, and then there's the collected, the allocated, and what's available still to spend. So that certainly would be the way in which I expect to see the numbers part presented, but I would like the numbers part broken down with some dates, because obviously if SIL doesn't get spent, it disappears, and we need to have some visibility on how that pipeline is running. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the verbal update on Dunsville Park. Peter Vickers, please.
Thank you, Chair. So there was a wasn't all member briefing. It was a general communication went out several weeks ago, just saying what the situation was. So it was a press release on the 2nd of September, literally saying that the Trinity's made its decision on who's going to be the purchaser, and that the council's still very interested in working with whoever that person is going to be. We don't know who it is at this point in time. It's confidential between the purchaser and Trinity. And we don't have any further information to that at this point. So there isn't much of an update to give there, Chair.
Any questions regarding Dunsville? I'd just like to ask how much of the funds that were authorised for this bid were actually spent.
Chair, it was just literally be about £80,000 once we've got the final legal bill in. We've had the rest of the bills in for this.
Thank
That's
you.
the expectation.
Councillor Hyman.
Sorry, I had a great deal of difficulty hearing that. I mean, I did ask earlier whether we'd had whether we managed to get all the planning application backlog through, and I didn't get to hear it. Don't think I heard an answer to that, and I don't think I heard an answer to your question there, and it's the important one. So could that just be reiterated? How much? Was there a number given there?
Yes, £80,000 has been spent, although not quite all the legal bills are in, but that's the expected total.
Right. Yes, my concerns are more about if we've got box builders and everybody piling into the site and getting a million miles away from the original vision. But I don't think that's really our questions for this evening's. As far as the overall issue, are we allowed to look at the process that the executive went through in this in getting to the decision, which ultimately was a brave decision, but cost us 80 grand. Will that be coming before us, or is now the only opportunity that we'll ever have to question it?
I'm not sure quite how much more we can say on that subject. I thought there was already a review of the process, but I might be wrong on that. But my recollection was the decision was called in, and I don't think we'll be revisiting that.
Right, there has been debate at the executive. I just wondered whether it would, now that the thing's over, but we haven't had the full story yet. Of course, I appreciate that. Perhaps we just have to wait until we find out what the emerging news is and whether the rumours are true. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. If we move on, next item on the agenda is the verbal update on Guildford collaboration. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Follows was at Luton Airport at 5:30 p.m. So I'm not quite sure where he's managed to land to join us, but we're grateful for your attendance.
What it definitely isn't, Chair, is a pub midway through. So I apologise for any music that you can hear in the background. So yes, a quick verbal update. Again, my apologies for not being there in person as I originally intended this evening. We've obviously been working through the various things that Council authorised us to do at the last full Council. Guildford and Waverley simultaneously put our Chief Executive and Managing Director respectively at risk and started the formal consultation process on the 10th of August. That consultation process finished on the 9th of September, so just a few days ago. In the intervening period, we've had 2 consultation meetings with Tom and myself and officers. We've convened a session also for training for the Joint Appointments Committee, which is made up of myself, Councillor Clark and Councillor Mulliner, and our opposite numbers at Guildford Borough Council. We'll be meeting on the 22nd of September for the first official time to discuss the outcomes of the consultation and the next steps. We have an outlined timetable of the next steps. If there is an internal candidate selection, it is likely that the Joint Appointments Committee will be able to express that on the 27th of September. We're at the moment discussing the actual mechanism for interviews and also a stakeholder panel that will be convened, which involves people such as local town clerks, local businesses, the Royal Surrey Police and other stakeholders that's jointly within the Guildford and Waverley area. Should we have to go to an external candidate, it is likely that would take place much later. The earliest appointment theoretically for an internal candidate is the week commencing the 1st of November. If we are needing to move to an external candidate, we will have to go, it will probably take as long as March, we believe, on the current timetables. The only other thing really going on in the background on this is the inter-authority agreement, which some further work has been undertaken on by the team. But realistically, we are waiting for the single joint chief executive, as we really need a single person driving the bus really to make sure that that document is as good and robust as possible. So from my point of view, we're working through progressing all of the things that we've got authority to do. And at the moment, that's all I've really got to update. And I will just say very quickly, thank you to Robin and to Sally and to all of the officers that are helping support this, because their support has been both necessary and invaluable throughout the process so far. Thank you, Chair, and I'm of course happy to take any questions members might have.
Are there any questions for Councillor Follows? Councillor Hyman.
Yes, absolutely, thank you. I thought that we were going to be getting some details coming to us. I was expecting them to have come to us already in respect of the was it heads of terms or the partnership agreement. So we're going to get all sorts of details on. I am concerned, obviously, that we need to be thinking about and putting in place some arrangements for, or at least explain to us what the rules are and make sure everybody knows what the rules are in respect of, for instance, property acquisition. If both Guildford and ourselves are looking at properties and vying with each other, competing with each other to buy commercial properties, we need to know how we're going to sort that one out if we've got a joint chief executive. Similarly, Guildford's currently still, I think, carrying out a local plan part 1 review. We will have to do one at some point. We've got LPB2 coming forward. If Guildford decides that they're going to abide by the habitats legislation and we don't, where do we stand, and vice versa? How do we work that one out? Because the chairman of the Joint Strategic Partnership Board, who knows full well what's going on, is one of our Guildford councillors that we will be in partnership with. So, you know, there are certainly some big issues that need to be sorted out between us. I hear about a stakeholder panel and that sort of thing, but how do we, as members who, you know, have everyday experience and years of experience of the pitfalls of councils, if we're trying to put 2 of them together, you know, in what way are we going to be able to look at it and say, well, actually, we need to change that before you make a decision, because we really don't want this to come in front of us, you know, where some of us might know that there are going to be difficulties going forward. We want to make sure that we sort things out in advance rather than have to try and debate them in a council meeting, you know, in a strange room across a car park.
Have you any comment on that, Councillor Follows?
Yeah, yes, a few. Firstly, bravo for getting habitats in there, Jerry. On collaboration, that was a struggle, but well played. Secondly, if we just look at some of the other points, indeed. So the Joint Appointments Committee actually doesn't decide anything; it recommends to council. So as you say, the council's all members will get the final say on actually who is appointed and when. In terms of the stakeholder meeting, we actually had a fairly interesting discussion with HR about whether the members of the Joint Appointments Committee can actually attend the stakeholder meeting, and that's actually a discussion that's ongoing, because my assumption was that we would all, of course, go, but it seems as though that's not done in this, and so that's a debate that's going on with the HR advisors at the moment as well. In terms of free meetings before council to deal with anything that might come up, it would be my intention to ask any person trying to get this job to present to all members informally and respond to questions from all members informally as well, so that we aren't, as you say, just going into council and either rubber stamping this or trying to have the debate that we needed to have earlier in that session. So we'll make sure that members get that opportunity. In terms of things like property matters and other matters that be subject to the inter-authority agreement, obviously we got to a point and realistically stopped in the main because we needed that single officer to lead it. Obviously there's been some extras being worked on in the background of this, but none of those things are valid until they've been approved by council. So that currently doesn't count. In terms of things like property and serious staff appointments, though, although there is no written agreement as yet as to what we should and have to do, everybody is acting pragmatically, and I don't think either council would take part in any kind of large-scale property acquisition or senior staff appointment without flagging it to their opposite numbers at the other council. And certainly it's the sort of thing that we would discuss between myself and Joss, and certainly between James Whiteman and Tom Horwood as currently stands. The final point that I just also make about local plan, my understanding is, and I don't want to drift into too difficult water with Guildford, their review of their local plan is currently review with a small r, an assessment of the recalculation of figures, like we did prior to the High Court hearing. My understanding is it's not a full capital R review of their local plan, incomplete. But I will clarify that with Guildford, as I'm not entirely sure of which version of the word review they're choosing, but I understand it's not the full open one as yet. Happy, of course, to take any further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Paul. The next item on our agenda is the Biennial Scrutiny Report, which Mark is going to introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. You would normally get this review at the end of each municipal year, but with COVID, that wasn't possible in 2019-20, hence you've got 2 years together. I don't propose to say much more about this, but if you have any comments, if you think, given your experience having been on the committee and party to much of these debates and work, if you think there are things that could be better reflected, or things that work that was done that should be added, I'm very happy to hear those comments, and I can work up some amendments for coordinating board to consider.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for a very comprehensive report. Does anyone have any questions to put forward? Councillor Hyman.
Yes, in fact, I think this takes me back to 2018. I think I appreciate, Mark, it's very difficult for you to write a report on a period when you weren't here and to have to rely on everybody who's previous even previous administrations trying to rely on other people's memories. I think the top of page 79, which is page 5 of the report itself, agenda page 79, that it tells us about the group undertaking participatory budgeting with MEL research. I'm pretty sure that was before 2019, isn't it?
No, I disagree on that, because I was only elected in 2019 and I remember being involved in briefing the questions.
In writing the questions? Yeah. Are you sure?
I'm
Well, isn't it
100%
funny how
sure.
time doesn't fly? Okay. I was quite certain the Conservatives, because I thought I remember Councillor Mulliner being heavily involved in that, and me, it may have been a previous.
It did
something.
already exist, but it was
Right.
revamped during the 2019-20 council year.
Was it? Okay. I just thought that I knew I'd seen it before everybody else joined, sort of, so to speak, you know, back to Kurt Pryor.
I was only going to say what you said now, Chair, which I think you're both right, because it spanned, it started in one administration and continued in another.
No. Okay, thanks. Yeah, there was one bit in there which I thought I think this was Councillor Coburn's input on page 82 for the Environment O&S Committee. It's the first paragraph says that the declaration of climate emergency presaged a significant amount of policy development, and as far as I know, that means to presage is to sign or warn of an event that's imminent or whatever and unwelcome, and I'm not entirely sure that's what is meant. I'm sure there's a different word there you can put in. It just sounds wrong to me. But the second sentence there, where it talks about the committee taking the lead in highlighting the importance of environmental issues such as air quality and biodiversity, I'm not entirely sure that the committee should try and take any great credit on those issues, because those are the two issues where we have problems with the regulatory framework, Chairman. We haven't had an air quality action plan for various reasons of outside of our control, but we don't want to, over a period where we certainly didn't have reports that we were able to put in and weren't able to meet our regulatory requirements. We shouldn't be taking credit for not meeting them, really. So we need to be a little bit careful in what we say, if it matters. I noticed at the bottom of page 82, it talks about air quality status and talks about the air quality steering group and working group. I don't think they've met in the 2 years or more, over 2 years since. So I'm not sure what that's on about. There is. Yes, March 21 at the very end of this report on page 88. It's omitted the March 21 meeting, which and that's the meeting at which I'm supposedly reliably informed that we went through the Where Worked Happens new project and discussed and agreed everything. I think at that meeting. Not in the minutes, not on the webcast, but apparently we did. So I don't know why March 21's been missed off of that, but there are issues that we need to discuss on that. So I thought I'd flag up that we've missed it, and perhaps we could confirm whether or not what we did actually talk about at that meeting. Thanks.
Mark, could you pick up on those 3 points, please? The taking the lead on things like air quality, whether the group has met and whether we should have something in for March 21. I confess I don't remember discussing where work happens. I mean, the last comment we have here is on our ICT strategy, which I do recall.
Yes, so in terms of the biodiversity and air quality, it's not really my place to comment on the effectiveness of the outputs from the council as a whole, but I think it is indisputable that Environment O&S has considered on several occasions both of those issues. So I think you can say pretty much as a factual statement that they have highlighted them. On the comment about the Farnham, the air quality committees, that's reporting what the committee resolved. And in September 2019, they resolved to welcome that those organisations and boards existed and the work they had done. I don't think, if that work has not continued, that I don't think that actually negates the accuracy of that statement, because it's time specific. On March 21, I confess I'm not 100% why there isn't anything there. This doesn't necessarily, some items get considered in other bits of the report. For example, if they've been cross-cutting across different teams. So for example, the COVID recovery stuff, which might have covered the where works happen, because that spread across all the different committees, may just be covered in a different section of the report. And it is also possible sometimes, if there wasn't really a substantive resolution, I tended not to include that in that table.
Thank you, Mark. I do think, Councillor Hyman, it's a valid question for the Environment O&S as to what the work of the Waverley Air Quality Steering Group and the Barnham Air Quality Working Group has produced.
Chair, I would say thank you for the feedback on presaged. I will think of an alternative and suggest.
Thanks. No, as far as the air quality, people will say, well, that's been overtaken by the Surrey County Council Farnham Infrastructure Project. Well, you know, actually, it's a Waverley responsibility in the first place. Air quality, it's you know.
Thank you. Any other observations on the scrutiny report? Okay, the next item on our agenda, and I will go through this very quickly because this is on our agenda really as information only. A decision's been taken that only one O&S committee should discuss the car parking review report, and that committee is the Environment O&S Committee, which meets a week from tonight. As members with a particular interest in value for money and customer service, we are urged to attend and participate. There is also the opportunity to put questions to Richard Homewood at any time, and also to pose formal questions to the committee. I certainly can't attend next Monday, so I shall be making my comments to the chair and the rest of the committee so they're aware of them. But we won't discuss it this evening, just be very aware that that timetable exists. The next item on the agenda is the Property Investment Advisory Board activity report update. Peter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is a standing report on the Value for Money Scrutiny Committee agenda. It presents two lots of information. One's financial, just showing where we're at in terms of our overall commercial portfolio financially. And the other report, which is Exempt Annex 1, just gives a summary of the asset management investment activity that's been undertaken in the last quarter. So both are in exempt purely because there's information there that's commercially sensitive. But Annex 2 effectively is the financial summary, and it shows that there are no issues at all as far as our commercial portfolio is concerned. At the moment, we've got 5 tenants that are on payment plans that are not aligned to the leases, so effectively they've gone on to monthly, which is assisting in cash flow through COVID. It's a great result when you consider the diversity of the tenant covenants that we have within that portfolio. But there isn't much more to say on that, other than I think it's a good result for the council to be able to have such a robust position on its commercial situation at the moment. And I can't really discuss much about the other annex in open session, to be fair. So if you wish to get into specifics, we'll probably have to go into exempt.
Does anyone have any questions for Peter before we move into exempt? Because I do have some questions on the pink papers. Councillor Hyman.
Thanks. I'm not entirely sure why, which information that's on here is exempt information. I mean, obviously, if we're in open session, we're going to be talking about the things that are in the exempt, but we don't think are a secret, or you know, and things which we think are secret. So I'm not entirely sure, because I can go through this, the property investment update here, the exempt annexes. And I know, apart from the fact that there are some visits going to happen sometime soon, but it appears I'm not allowed to say where and when, even though I don't think that's a secret to anybody. Most of this in here, which bits are actually secret that we're not allowed to tell anybody? Because I don't know why we should be.
I can't answer that, Councillor Hyman, or I might need to shoot you.
Well, no, the point is that we have to be able to identify it.
No, I mean, I think there's a mistake in the way this part of the report's been presented, because what's stated as exempt Annex 2 should be the bit that isn't exempt and that Peter was just addressing, which is the factual report on the return on capital on the existing portfolio. Anything else is in exempt, and I would like, unless once Councillor Nicholson's had a chance to speak, to move into that.
Just a question on this one. I'd like to give the committee some information on the Wayhill site, the fairground car park site, and the Way Down Lane car park site. It's information rather than financial information. Is it possible for me to speak about this now, or will we speak about this in exempt? I'm quite happy to do either, as we wish.
I mean, since I don't know anything about these sites, I can only be guided by what the officers have told me should be an exempt session, and it's on pink paper. I think I'm right, Robin. We shouldn't try and delve in and pick and choose.
Indeed.
Thank you. In that case, I would like to take this meeting into exempt session by saying that pursuant to Procedure Rule 20 and in accordance with Section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following items on the grounds that it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during the items, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by Section 1001 of the Act of the description specified in the appropriate paragraphs of the revised Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. Are we agreed to move into exempt session?